The air in the great hall of the Crimson Fong Pack was thick with the scent of pine incense and simmering anticipation. Tonight was the Moonfire ceremony, the night the pack's bonds were forged and futures were sealed under the watchful eye of the Moon Goddess. I stood before the stone altar, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. My simple linen dress felt coarse against my skin, a stark contrast to the silks and velvets worn by the other she-wolves. But it didn't matter. Tonight I would be bound to Liam the pack's beta and my life would finally begin. Liam was everything I was not, bold, ambitious and born of a powerful bloodline. He was the sun and I a mere shadow. But the goddess had chosen me for him, our fates intertwined since the day he'd first presented me with the ceremonial moon bloom. I clutched the withered blossom now, its faded petals a testament to the months of waiting. The High Elder, a stooped wolf with eyes like chips of flint, struck his staff against the floor. The sound echoed, silencing the whispers that skittered through the crowd. "Elara of the Whispering Stream," he called, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Step forward." I did, my knees trembling. A nervous smile touched my lips as I looked at Liam. He stood tall and proud, his blonde hair gleaming like spun gold in the torchlight, his jaw set in a line of perfect aristocratic strength. But his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, weren't on me. They were fixed on a point just over my shoulder, a cold, distant look that sent a shiver of dread down my spine. My wolf, a gentle spirit within me, whimpered in confusion. "Beta Liam of the Crimson Fong," the elder intoned. "Take your mate. Seal the bond blessed by the goddess." A profound silence descended upon the hall. This was the moment. I waited for him to step forward, to brush his lips against mine, to complete the ritual that would make us whole. Instead he took a breath, his chest expanding, and his voice rang out, sharp and clear as shattering ice. "I, Liam of the Crimson Fong, reject this bond." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed from my lungs. A collective gasp swept through the hall, a wave of shock and disbelief. My smile faltered, crumbling from my face. "Liam," I whispered, my voice a fragile thread. "What are you saying?" "The goddess chose." "The goddess was mistaken," he declared, finally turning his gaze on me. There was no warmth, no regret, only a chilling finality. He addressed the crowd, his voice booming with authority. "The Crimson Fong Pack needs strength. It needs powerful alliances, not the sentiment of a flawed pairing. My loyalty is to the future of this pack, and that future cannot be anchored to an Omega whose only gift is mending broken bones." Weak. He was calling me weak. My healing abilities, a gift passed down through my maternal line, a source of quiet pride, were being twisted into a mark of shame. Every murmur in the hall became a poisoned dart. An Omega healer. He deserves a warrior. He was never good enough. Their pity was a suffocating shroud, their scorn a brand against my skin. "Please," I begged, taking a step toward him, my hand outstretched. "Don't do this." He turned away from me as if I were nothing, a piece of dust to be brushed from his shoulder. The High Elder's voice wavered, thick with shock and ancient protocol. "The bond once offered cannot be refused without consequence. By the old laws, it must be severed by will." Something inside me fractured. A searing, white-hot pain erupted from my core, a spiritual tearing that was more agonizing than any physical wound I had ever healed. I cried out, clutching my chest as the invisible thread connecting my soul to his was ripped away. It felt as if the goddess herself had reached down and torn me in two. I collapsed onto the cold stone floor, the world dissolving into a blur of pain and swirling torchlight. The ceremony was over. Liam walked away without a backward glance. The whispers grew louder. And I, Elara, the pack's gentle healer, became the ember of its shame. Chapter 2, The Taste of Ash. The days that followed were a waking nightmare, each moment steeped in the bitter taste of ash. I was moved from my small but comfortable room near the pack healer's den to the desolate Omega quarters at the far edge of the territory. It was a cold, damp building where the unwanted and the forgotten were housed, a place that smelled of mildew and despair. The life I had known was gone, replaced by a suffocating silence and the heavy weight of averted eyes. No one spoke to me. The wolves I had grown up with, whose injuries I had tended to with tireless devotion, now looked straight through me. If their gazes did happen to meet mine, They were filled with a mixture of pity and contempt that was worse than any spoken insult. I was a walking embodiment of failure, a reminder of a bond so weak it had been publicly shattered. My wolf, once a source of quiet comfort, remained curled in a tight knot of misery deep inside me, her spirit broken. The only thing I had left was my work. I still possessed my healing gift, the gentle warmth that flowed from my hands to soothe pain and knit flesh. But now even that felt like a curse. I was permitted to tend only to the other Omegas, the lowest of the pack, in a dank infirmary with dwindling supplies. They accepted my help with a grim resignation, their own shame reflected in their weary eyes. We were the pack's broken toys, hidden away so as not to mar the perfection of the Crimson Fong. The news of Liam's new betrothal spread through the pack like wildfire. Her name was Serena, the daughter of the Alpha from the neighboring Stone Ridge pack. She was beautiful, they whispered, a fierce warrior with a bloodline that promised powerful pups and a formidable alliance. I saw her once from a distance, walking beside Liam in the training grounds. She was everything I was not, tall, confident, her laughter echoing with an easy power. Liam looked at her with an adoration that he had never once shown me, a look that pierced the fragile shell I had built around my heart. One evening, huddled by the weak fire in the Omega Hall, I overheard two of the pack's council members speaking just outside the door, their voices low and careless. "It's an embarrassment," one of them, Elder Corbin, grumbled. "Having her here while we finalize the alliance with Stone Ridge. Her presence is a complication." "The Alpha agrees," the other replied. "Liam did what was necessary for the pack. The girl is a ghost at the feast. We need to find a permanent solution." "Exile," Corbin suggested. "Send her to the barren lands. She can live out her days with the other outcasts." "It would be a mercy," the other agreed. A cold dread washed over me, colder than the stone floor beneath my feet. They were going to cast me out, send me to die in the desolate wilderness. My rejection was not enough. They wanted to erase me completely. The last flicker of hope within me died, leaving behind a hard, cold resolve. They would not decide my fate. I would not be discarded like a piece of trash. If I was to become a ghost, I would choose my own haunting ground. That night, under the sliver of a new moon, I decided to run. Chapter 3. Flight into Shadow. The storm broke just after midnight, a furious onslaught of wind and rain that lashed against the stone walls of the Omega quarters. It was a gift from the goddess, a cloak of chaos to cover my escape. My hands moved with a feverish urgency in the darkness, packing the few possessions I owned into a worn leather satchel. A change of clothes, a small pouch of dried herbs, a flint and steel, and the small leather-bound journal my grandmother had left me. Its pages were filled with her elegant script, detailing the properties of countless plants and the ancient art of healing remedies. It was my most prized possession, a link to the life that had been stolen from me. I wrapped a dark cloak around my shoulders, the rough wool scratching my skin. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild bird desperate for freedom. Every creak of the floorboards, every howl of the wind sounded like the approach of guards. My plan was simple and desperate: to flee into the dark wood, the vast, untamed forest that bordered our territory. It was a place of grim legends, a neutral ground shunned by all packs, rumored to be teeming with savage rogues and ancient, unpredictable magic. But beyond it, miles and miles away, lay the lands of the Shadowmoon pack, a near-mythical group said to offer sanctuary to outcasts and runaways. It was a fool's hope, a whispered rumor, but it was the only hope I had. Slipping out of the Omega Hall was easy. No one bothered to guard the unwanted. The main gates were another matter. 2 sentries stood watch, their broad shoulders silhouetted against the flickering gate lamps. The storm was my only ally. I waited for a powerful gust of wind to rattle the gate and send a shower of rain into their faces. In that moment of distraction, I darted from the shadows, my bare feet silent on the wet ground. I squeezed through a small, forgotten gap in the perimeter fence, the one the Omega children used to sneak out to pick berries. The rough wood snagged my cloak, tearing a small gash, but I was through. I didn't look back. I couldn't. To look back would be to see the life I had lost, the home that had become my prison. I ran, fueled by a terror that was sharper than any pain I had ever known. The forest floor was a treacherous carpet of slick roots and unseen thorns. Rain plastered my hair to my face and soaked my cloak until it felt as heavy as stone. The roar of the storm drowned out the sound of my own ragged breaths. The dark wood rose before me like a wall of impenetrable shadow, its ancient trees twisted into monstrous shapes. The air grew colder as I crossed the invisible boundary line, the scent of damp earth and decay filling my lungs. This was it. I was truly alone, an exile by my own decree. My wolf, who had been silent for weeks, stirred within me, a flicker of primal fear mixing with a strange, exhilarating sense of freedom. I pushed deeper into the suffocating darkness, with every step leaving the Crimson Fong pack and the girl I used to be further and further behind. Chapter 4. The Scent of the Hunted. For 3 days the Darkwood was my world. It was a place where the sunlight struggled to pierce the dense canopy, leaving the forest floor in a perpetual twilight. Time became a blur of survival. I used the knowledge from my grandmother's journal to find edible roots and to distinguish clean water sources from stagnant ones. I learned to move like a ghost, my senses on high alert, every snap of a twig sending a jolt of fear through me. At night, I'd find shelter in the hollow of a great oak or beneath a rocky overhang, wrapping myself in my damp cloak and praying the strange, guttural cries of unseen creatures would stay distant. My healing gift, the one Liam had scorned, became my lifeline. When I stumbled and gashed my leg on a sharp rock, I found silver moss to pack the wound and prevent infection, focusing the warmth in my hands to speed the mending process. The constant thrum of my own quiet magic was a small comfort in the oppressive silence. But I was not alone. By the third evening I began to feel it, the prickling sensation of being watched. The scent came on the wind, a foul, musky odor of unwashed fur and stale blood. Rogues. My wolf paced restlessly inside me, her fear a sharp metallic taste in my mouth. The hunt began subtly. A shadow moving at the edge of my vision. A low growl that the wind seemed to swallow before I could be sure I'd heard it. But soon their boldness grew. They were toying with me, driving me, herding me toward a place of their choosing. Panic began to claw at the edges of my control. I ran, my satchel bouncing against my back, my lungs burning. The forest became a maze of looming trees and grasping thorns, their dark shapes closing in around me. They finally cornered me in a small clearing where a waterfall cascaded down a sheer rock face, leaving me with no escape. 3 of them emerged from the shadows, their forms hulking and grotesque. They were larger than pack wolves, their fur matted with mud and gore, their eyes glowing with a feral, mindless hunger. The alpha, a beast with a scarred muzzle and yellowed fangs, took a step forward, a low snarl rumbling in its chest. I scrambled backward until my back hit the cold, wet rock of the cliff face. My hand fumbled inside my satchel, closing around the sharp flint rock I used for fires. It wasn't much of a weapon, but I wouldn't die cowering. I held it out, my arm trembling. "Stay back," I hissed, the words barely a whisper. The lead rogue laughed, a horrifying guttural sound. It lunged. I screamed, throwing myself to the side. Its claws raked across my arm, tearing through my cloak and flesh. Pain, hot and blinding, shot up to my shoulder. Before I could recover, another rogue slammed into me from the other side, knocking the breath from my body. I was pinned, the stench of its breath suffocating me. This was the end. My desperate flight had led only to a bloody, anonymous death. But just as the alpha opened its jaws to deliver the killing bite, a new scent cut through the foul air, the clean, sharp aroma of winter pine, cold stone, and a power so immense it felt like the mountain itself had come alive. A roar shattered the clearing, a sound of pure, unadulterated dominance that shook the very ground. A colossal shadow detached itself from the trees. It was a wolf, but unlike any I had ever seen. Its fur was the color of midnight, its eyes like molten silver, and its presence radiated an ancient and terrifying authority. The 3 rogues froze, their predatory hunger instantly replaced by primal terror. They whimpered, flattening themselves to the ground in submission. The giant wolf paid them no mind. It took 3 silent steps forward, and with a speed that defied its size, tore the throat out of the first rogue. It dispatched the other 2 with the same brutal, terrifying efficiency. In seconds it was over. The clearing was silent save for the rush of the waterfall and my own ragged gasps. The massive wolf stood over the bodies of the slain rogues, its dark fur barely stained by the carnage. Then it turned its molten silver eyes on me. Chapter 5. Alpha of the Shadows. The great wolf held my gaze for a long, breathless moment. There was no malice in its silver eyes, only a profound ancient intelligence that seemed to see straight through me, past the fear and the pain to the very core of my soul. My entire body trembled, but my fear was slowly being replaced by a sense of awe. This was no ordinary wolf. This was a creature of legend. It took a step toward me and then another, its movements fluid and deliberate. The world seemed to shift and blur around its form, and where the massive wolf had stood a moment before, there was now a man. He was the tallest man I had ever seen, built with the raw, formidable power of the mountain itself. His hair was as black as the wolf's fur, falling untamed around a face that was all harsh angles and stark beauty. A jagged scar cut down from his left temple, narrowly missing an eye that was the same mesmerizing silver as the wolf's. He was cloaked in dark, practical leathers, and the air around him crackled with an aura of absolute command. This was an alpha. Not just an alpha but the alpha. The scent of winter pine and cold stone clung to him, a scent of untamed elemental power. He knelt beside me, his movements economical and precise. He didn't speak, but his silver eyes surveyed the deep bleeding gashes on my arm with a detached intensity. I flinched as he reached out, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as his fingers brushed against the torn fabric of my cloak. "Rogues of the Blacktooth clan," he finally said. His voice was a low, quiet rumble like rocks shifting deep within the earth. It was a voice that didn't need to be raised to command obedience. "They rarely venture this far east. You must have a scent that carries." I swallowed, my throat dry. Thank you. You saved my life." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his attention still on my injury. "You are a healer," he stated. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" I whispered, clutching my wounded arm. "I can smell it," he replied, his gaze finally lifting to meet mine. "The magic in your blood. It smells of mountain blossoms and clean earth. It's the reason they were hunting you. A prize." I shuddered at the thought. He stood, his shadow falling over me. He was an intimidating presence, a paradox of savage grace and quiet intensity. I was still a trespasser, an omega who had stumbled into the path of a predator far more dangerous than the ones he had just slain. "What is your name and pack?" he asked, his tone flat, betraying no emotion. "Elara," I said, my voice barely audible. "I have no pack." A flicker of something, curiosity perhaps, passed through his silver eyes. "A lone omega in the darkwood. You are either very brave or very foolish." "Perhaps both," I admitted, a wave of dizziness washing over me from the blood loss. He watched me for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. I expected him to turn and walk away, to leave me to my fate now that the immediate threat was gone. Instead he made a decision. "The journey through the rest of this forest alone will kill you," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "My territory is a day's walk west. You can come with me and my pack healer will tend to your wounds. Or you can stay here and wait for the rest of the Blacktooth clan to find you." It was not a kind offer but a practical one. There was no warmth in his words, yet there was no cruelty either. It was a choice between a certain death and an uncertain future. My wolf, battered but not broken, urged me to trust him. She recognized the power in him not as a threat, but as a certainty, solid and unyielding as the ground beneath us. "I will come with you," I said, forcing myself to my feet and immediately swaying. He caught my uninjured arm before I could fall, his grip firm and steadying. The contact sent a jolt of unexpected warmth through me. For the first time since my rejection, I felt something other than fear or despair. It was a strange, unsettling feeling of safety. "I am Draven," he said quietly, as if the name itself was a secret. "Alpha of the Shadowmoon Pack." Chapter 6. The Shadowmoon Sanctuary. The journey was a blur of exhaustion and a strange, heightened awareness. Draven moved through the treacherous forest with an unnerving silence, his powerful strides eating up the ground. I struggled to keep pace, my wounded arm throbbing with every step. Just as the gray light of dawn began to filter through the canopy, my vision started to swim, the trees dissolving into dark, wavering shapes. My legs gave out. Before I hit the ground, I was swept into a pair of unyielding arms. The world tilted, then steadied. I was pressed against Draven's chest, my head lolling against his shoulder. His body was a furnace of warmth against the damp chill of the morning, his scent, pine, stone, and something uniquely masculine, enveloping me. It should have been terrifying, this intimate proximity to such a formidable stranger, but a profound sense of security settled over me. I could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart beneath my ear, a rhythm as solid and reassuring as the earth itself. My own frantic pulse began to slow, matching his. In this small, protected space, the horrors of the past few days seemed to fade, and for the first time in a long time, my wolf sighed in something akin to peace. We arrived at the Shadowmoon stronghold as the sun crested the mountains. It was nothing like the polished, almost sterile fortress of the Crimson Fong. This was a place carved directly from the mountain's heart, a collection of stone buildings and deep caves that blended seamlessly with the rugged landscape. There were no gilded banners, only the quiet, watchful eyes of the wolves who emerged from the shadows to greet their alpha. They were a motley assembly, scarred warriors, cautious she-wolves, and wild-eyed pups who peered at me with blatant curiosity. They were outcasts, survivors, and it showed in their fierce, guarded expressions. Draven carried me through the main cavern, his steps never faltering under my weight. The air buzzed with whispers and I felt dozens of eyes on me, a mixture of suspicion and intrigue. He brought me to a large, warm den, the air thick with the scent of drying herbs. An old she-wolf with hair the color of snow and eyes as dark and knowing as the forest floor looked up from a grinding stone. "Alpha," she said, her voice raspy with age. She bowed her head slightly, her gaze immediately falling on my blood-soaked arm. "Mara, she needs you," Draven said, his voice a low command. He gently set me down on a fur-lined cot. The sudden loss of his warmth left me feeling cold and exposed. Mara's gnarled fingers were surprisingly gentle as she unwrapped the makeshift bandage. She clicked her tongue at the sight of the deep, angry gashes. "Black tooth work. Filthy beasts." Her dark eyes then traveled from the wound up to my neck, where the ghost of a broken bond sometimes seemed to shimmer in the low light. Her expression sharpened. "A rejection," she murmured, a statement, not a question. "Some alphas are fools. They throw away treasures they don't have the eyes to see." She began to clean the wound with a pungent salve that made me hiss in pain. Through the haze I watched Draven. He hadn't left. He stood near the entrance, a silent, brooding sentinel, his silver eyes fixed on me. He had saved me, brought me to safety, but the unreadable expression on his face made one thing clear. I had traded one dangerous world for another, and my presence in his sanctuary was a question he had yet to answer. Chapter 7. Wounds of the past, touch of the present. Mara's healing skills were formidable. She worked with an ancient, almost forgotten magic, her hands glowing with a soft green light as she coaxed my torn flesh to knit back together. By the second day, the pain had subsided to a dull ache and I was able to sit up, my arm wrapped in clean linen bandages. I spent the time in a feverish, dream-filled sleep, haunted by images of Liam's cold eyes and the roar of Draven's wolf form. I woke to the scent of pine and stone. Draven was in the den, standing by the fire pit, the flames casting dancing shadows across his scarred face. Mara was gone, leaving a bowl of savory broth on a small table beside my cot. The silence in the cavern was heavy, charged. "Mara says you will heal completely," he said, not turning to look at me. "Your own gift aids the process." "I'm grateful to her." "And to you," I replied, my voice still rough from sleep. He finally turned, his silver eyes pinning me to the cot. "Why were you in the Darkwood alone, Elara? Omegas do not simply run from their packs without cause." His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of an interrogation. He was stripping away my defenses, demanding the truth. I looked down at my hands. I was rejected by my mate, the beta of my pack. I was no longer welcome. "So you ran into a forest known to be filled with rogues," he countered, taking a step closer. "You chose a near-certain death over shame." "I chose a chance at freedom," I corrected, lifting my chin. "The alternative was exile to the barren lands. A slower death, but just as certain." He was silent for a long moment, studying me. "Every wolf in this pack," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense timbre, "is a survivor. We are the rejected, the betrayed, the exiled. We have forged a sanctuary from the pieces of our broken lives. We do not tolerate weakness here because weakness invites predators." He was testing me, searching for the fault lines in my spirit. He moved to the side of my cot, looming over me. His gaze dropped to my bandaged arm. "Let me see." Before I could protest, his large, calloused hand gently cradled my forearm, his fingers carefully tracing the edges of the linen wrap. A current of heat shot up my arm, a stark contrast to his cool touch. My breath hitched. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body, see the intricate silver flecks in his eyes. His thumb brushed against a patch of my skin and he went still. A low, almost inaudible growl rumbled in his chest. "I can still smell him on you," he murmured, his voice laced with a possessive displeasure that sent a thrill of fear and something else, something warm and reckless, through me. The lingering scent of a weakling who marked what was never truly his. He leaned in, his face just inches from mine, his warm breath ghosting across my neck. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought he would kiss me or perhaps tear out my throat. With Draven either seemed equally possible. But he did neither. He held the intense, charged moment for a heartbeat longer, his silver eyes burning into mine, before he straightened up abruptly and stepped back, breaking the spell. "Rest," he commanded, his voice once again a flat, emotionless rumble. He turned and swept from the den, leaving me breathless, trembling, and utterly confused by the storm of emotions he had awakened within me. Chapter 8: The Alpha's Gaze. Over the next week I was allowed to leave the healer's den. The Shadowmoon pack treated me with a cautious distance. I was Draven's discovery, the strange Omega he had carried from the woods, and no one seemed to know what to make of me. I took over small tasks in Mara's den, grinding herbs and preparing salves, finding comfort in the familiar work. It was during these times that I began to observe the pack and more specifically, its alpha. Draven was the undisputed center of their world. I would watch him from the mouth of the cave as he trained his warriors in the main courtyard. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of controlled brutality and lethal grace. He moved with a speed and power that seemed impossible for a man his size, sparring with 3 wolves at once and besting them with ease. He demanded everything from them, pushing them past their limits, yet he led every drill himself, his body gleaming with sweat, his muscles straining. He didn't command respect, he embodied it. And in his raw, untamed power, there was a magnetism that was both terrifying and deeply compelling. The whispers followed me everywhere. Some pack members, those who had also been Omegas in their former lives, would offer me shy, sympathetic smiles. But the warriors, particularly the she-wolves, watched me with narrowed eyes. I was an unknown quantity, a potential weakness. One she-wolf in particular made her disdain clear. Her name was Kelia. She was Draven's beta, a tall, formidable wolf with hair the color of burnished copper and a permanent sneer on her lips. Her eyes, whenever they landed on me, were chips of cold, green ice. One evening, Draven called for a pack meal in the Great Hall, a massive cavern lit by dozens of torches that made the crystalline veins in the rock walls glitter. I had planned to eat quietly in Mara's den, but one of Draven's sentinels appeared at the entrance. "The Alpha expects you," he said, his tone leaving no room for refusal. My heart pounded as I entered the hall. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. Draven sat at the head of a long stone table, a veritable king on a throne of rock. He looked up and his silver eyes found mine across the room. He gave a curt nod to the empty seat beside him. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled wolves. It was a seat of honor, a clear and undeniable display of favor. Trembling, I made my way to the table and sat. The whispers erupted again, louder this time. I could feel Kelia's glare burning into the side of my face. I kept my eyes fixed on my plate, my hands clenched in my lap. Then, under the table, I felt a sudden warmth as Draven's leg brushed against mine. I flinched, but he didn't move away. He kept it there, a subtle, possessive pressure that sent shivers through my entire body. Throughout the meal, the contact remained, a secret electric current between us. I dared to glance up at him. He wasn't looking at me, but I knew he was aware of my every breath. His silver gaze swept over the hall, a silent warning to anyone who would challenge his decision. He was claiming me not with words or a mark, but with a gaze that smoldered with ownership, making me feel like both his captive and his most prized treasure. Chapter 9: Whispers in the Dark. The Alpha's favor was a double-edged sword. While some pack members began to treat me with a hesitant respect, Kelia's hostility festered, turning from cold disdain into open antagonism. She found ways to remind me of my place, assigning me the most grueling tasks, from scrubbing the massive cooking cauldrons to sorting through spoiled supplies. I did it all without complaint, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Our confrontation came one evening when I was returning from the stream, my arms laden with a heavy bucket of water. Kelia blocked my path, her arms crossed over her chest, her entourage of 2 other warrior she-wolves flanking her. "Still playing the part of the meek little Omega?" she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "Don't think because the Alpha shows you pity that you belong here. You are a weakness, a stray he should have left for the rogues." "I am not your concern, Kelia," I said, my voice steady despite the frantic beating of my heart. She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You became my concern the moment he put you at his side. He's our strength. He will not be compromised by a rejected healer whose only skill is weeping." She shoved my shoulder hard, sloshing cold water down my front. "Go back to whatever gutter you crawled out of." Something inside me, a core of defiance I didn't know I possessed, hardened. I set the bucket down slowly. "I survived the Darkwood and the Blacktooth clan," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I think I can survive you." Her eyes flashed with fury. He lunged, but I was ready. I sidestepped, using her own momentum against her. Drawing on my grandmother's teachings, I brought my hand up in a sharp jab, striking a pressure point just below her collarbone. It wasn't a powerful blow, but it was precise. A jolt of paralyzing energy shot through her arm. She cried out, stumbling back, clutching her now numb limb in shock. Her cronies stared, momentarily stunned. "Enough." The voice was a roar of thunder, a wave of pure alpha dominance that slammed into all of us. Kelia and her friends immediately dropped into terrified crouches, their heads bowed. Draven emerged from the shadows, his face a mask of cold fury. His silver eyes were glacial, burning with a light that promised retribution. He ignored the others, his gaze fixed on Kelia. "You will not touch her again," he commanded. The air crackled with the force of his will. Kelia whimpered, unable to even look at him. "Apologize." He stammered, trembling. "Now." "I am sorry," she forced out, the words choked with humiliation. "Get out of my sight," Draven snarled. The 3 she-wolves scrambled away like chastened pups. He turned to me, the fury in his eyes softening into something else, something dark and protective. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "No," I whispered, my adrenaline starting to fade, leaving me shaky. He stepped closer, his large hands coming up to grip my shoulders. His touch was gentle, but his thumbs stroked my skin in a way that felt possessive, proprietary. "Her challenge was an insult to me," he murmured, his eyes searching my face in the dim light. "To my judgment." He paused, his gaze dropping to my throat, to the place where Liam's betrayal was an invisible scar. His thumb moved from my shoulder, tracing the delicate line of my neck. My breath caught. The air between us grew thick, heavy with unspoken tension. "You are a complication, Elara," he rasped, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. His head dipped lower, his lips parting slightly. They hovered a mere inch from mine, a breath away from a kiss that I suddenly wanted more than anything. But then, with a curse under his breath, he mastered himself. He released me and stepped back, the cold night air rushing into the space between us. "Stay away from Kelia," he ordered, his voice once again hard and controlled, before turning and disappearing into the darkness, leaving me trembling with a potent mixture of fear and frustrated desire. Chapter 10, The Fire Within. A few nights later, a cry of alarm echoed through the stronghold. A hunting party had returned, but they were not celebrating. They carried one of their own, a young wolf named Reese who was no more than 16. He'd been gored by a wild boar, its tusk tearing a vicious, ragged wound across his abdomen. They brought him straight to Mara's den, his lifeblood staining the furs they carried him on. Mara worked frantically, her ancient hands pressing poultices and chanting old words, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. The boy's breathing grew shallow, his skin pale and clammy. I stood by, handing her supplies, my own heart aching with a feeling of helpless dread. I could feel his life force fading, a flickering candle flame about to be extinguished. "It is too deep," Mara whispered, her face grim, her voice etched with defeat. "The spirit is leaving the vessel." The pack members gathered at the entrance of the den watched in grim silence. I saw Draven among them, his face carved from stone, but his silver eyes were filled with a desperate pain. Rhys was one of his. This was his family. In that moment, a memory surfaced. A dangerous, almost forbidden passage from my grandmother's journal. It spoke of a ritual of transference, a way for a healer to pour their own life energy directly into a dying body, to tether a fleeting spirit back to its flesh. The journal warned that the cost could be severe. If the healer's will was not strong enough, both patient and healer could be lost. It was a terrible risk. Looking at the dying boy and then at Draven's anguished face, I knew I had to try. "Let me," I said, my voice clear and steady in the tense silence. Mara looked at me, her eyes wide. "There is another way." I knelt beside Rhys, ignoring the skeptical murmurs from the doorway. I placed my hands on his chest, closing my eyes and reaching deep within myself, searching for the core of my own life force, the warm, glowing ember of my spirit. I found it and began to pull, willing it to flow through my arms and into the boy. The effort was immense, like trying to stop a river with my bare hands. A wave of exhaustion hit me, my vision blackening at the edges. I was failing. Then I felt a presence behind me. 2 large hands landed on my back, covering it completely. A jolt of immense, overwhelming power surged into me. It was raw, wild, and ancient. It was Draven. He was pouring his own formidable energy into me, using me as a conduit. Our spirits mingled, his strength bolstering my own, our life forces intertwining in an act of profound, shocking intimacy. It was more than a touch, it was a union. Together we pushed. The cavern air grew thick with magic, a visible shimmer around us. I felt the boy's spirit latch onto the energy, his weak pulse beginning to strengthen, to steady. Color returned to his cheeks. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. When it was over, I collapsed backward, utterly spent. Draven caught me, his strong arms wrapping around me, holding me tight against his chest. The den was silent, the pack staring in stunned awe. Rhys was breathing deeply, asleep but alive. In the quiet aftermath, surrounded by the scent of blood, herbs, and our combined magic, Draven shifted me in his arms. He tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his gaze. His silver eyes were no longer cold or unreadable. They blazed with a raw wildfire I had never seen before, a mixture of gratitude, awe, and a desperate, undeniable hunger. "Elara," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. And then his mouth was on mine. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a raw, desperate claiming, a collision of fire and ice, shadow and light. It was the taste of pine and power, a brand against my soul, and the silent, earth-shattering promise of the storm that was to come. Chapter 11. The Aftermath and the Alpha's Claim. The kiss was a cataclysm. It wasn't a gentle exploration but a raw, desperate declaration. Draven's lips were firm and demanding, moving against mine with a hunger that stole the breath from my lungs and the strength from my limbs. I was still cradled in his arms, held flush against the solid wall of his chest. The lingering magic from the healing ritual pulsed between us, a live wire that connected us on a level deeper than skin. I could feel the wild, untamed power of his spirit brushing against my own, a dangerous and intoxicating dance. He broke the kiss only when the need for air became undeniable, his forehead resting against mine. His breathing was as ragged as my own, his silver eyes blazing with an emotion so fierce it was almost frightening. The pack members at the entrance to the den were silent, their shock a palpable force in the air. Draven had just laid a very public, very possessive claim on me, and no one dared to move. "You," he growled, the word a vibration against my lips, "are mine." It wasn't a question or a request. It was a statement of fact as elemental as the mountain itself. Before I could process the weight of his words, he swept me into his arms as if I weighed nothing and strode from the healer's den. He moved through the stunned crowd of his pack, his expression a thunderous warning to anyone who might challenge him. He didn't take me back to the small cot I had been using. He carried me through the main cavern and up a winding stone staircase I had never seen before, leading to the highest levels of the stronghold, to his private chambers. The room was vast and Spartan, dominated by a huge stone hearth where a fire roared, and a massive bed covered in a mountain of dark furs. The air smelled of him, pine, cold stone, and the clean scent of winter. He set me down gently on the edge of the furs, the soft pelts a stark contrast to the hard plains of his body as he knelt before me. His gaze was intense, searching. What you did back there. The magic you used, it has a cost, Elara. You gave a part of yourself to save him. You gave a part of yourself to save me, I whispered, my hand instinctively coming up to cup his jaw. The rough stubble scraped against my palm. I felt your strength. It was the only thing that kept me from being consumed. His eyes darkened. I would not let you be consumed. He leaned in, his lips brushing mine again, softly this time, a stark contrast to the fire in the den. It was a kiss of reverence, of awe. But underneath it, the hunger still simmered, a predatory heat that promised to devour me. He pulled away slightly, his thumb stroking my lower lip. You have awakened something, little healer. Not just in me. Magic like that. It sings. It sends out a call. And now everyone knows you are here. The implication sent a chill down my spine. I was no longer just a rejected Omega hiding in the shadows. I was a beacon, and the Alpha who had claimed me was now my only shield against the darkness that was sure to answer my call. Chapter 12. A Bed of Furs and Scars. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting a warm, flickering glow across the stone walls of Draven's chambers. He rose from kneeling and began to shed his leather tunic, his movements fluid and unself-conscious. My breath caught in my throat. His back was a road map of old battles, a tapestry of scars that spoke of a life lived on the edge of violence. Each white line was a story I suddenly desperately wanted to know. He turned to face me, and the scars continued across his chest and abdomen, claw marks, the puckered memory of a blade, the faint burn of old magic. He was not a pristine, polished alpha like Liam. He was a warrior, forged in fire and pain, beautiful in his imperfection. He saw me looking, and for a moment, a flicker of something guarded, almost vulnerable, crossed his face. Every pack has its laws, he said, his voice a low rumble. The Shadowmoon have only one: survive. These, he gestured to his scars, are the lessons of survival. He came to sit beside me on the bed, the furs shifting under his weight. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the faint, silvery scar on my neck from Kelia's earlier attack. And this is yours. It's nothing compared to yours, I whispered. No, he said, his silver eyes intense. Some of the deepest wounds leave no mark on the skin. He knew. He saw past the rejection, past the shame, to the shattered pieces of the girl I had been. And in his gaze I didn't see pity. I saw recognition. The air grew thick, charged with unspoken words and a palpable rising need. He leaned in, and this time there was no hesitation. His mouth found mine and the world fell away. This kiss was different from the others. It was a slow, deliberate exploration, a tasting and a learning. He coaxed my lips apart, his tongue tracing their seam before delving inside with a possessive heat that made my wolf purr. My hands moved of their own accord, exploring the hard contours of his chest, my fingers tracing the stories written on his skin. He groaned against my mouth, a sound of pure, primal pleasure that vibrated through my entire body. He pushed me back gently onto the mountain of furs, his powerful frame covering mine, his weight a comforting, dominant pressure. Clothes became an inconvenience, shed with an urgency that left us both breathless. Skin met skin. His was hot, roughened by the elements, while mine felt sensitive, alive under his touch. He explored my body with the same intensity he did everything else, his hands and mouth mapping every curve, every dip, every secret place. He worshipped me and he consumed me. When he finally entered me, it was with a reverence that shattered my last defenses. It was a slow, deep claiming, a joining that was more than just physical. As our bodies moved together in the firelight, I felt the echoes of the magic we had shared, the threads of our spirits weaving together, becoming inextricably tangled. In the arms of the Alpha of Shadows, surrounded by the evidence of his violent past, I found a sense of wholeness I never knew was possible. It was a fierce, savage and beautiful solace, a pact sealed not with words, but with the fire in our blood. Chapter 13. The Shadow in the East. Our peace was shattered just before dawn. A frantic pounding on the heavy oak door of Draven's chambers broke through the warm, sated haze that had enveloped us. Draven rose in one fluid motion, pulling on his breeches, his body instantly shifting from lover to alpha. "Enter," he commanded. A young scout, his face pale and grim, burst into the room. "Alpha. It's the Eastern Patrol. They're gone." Draven went still. "Gone," Their tracks lead to the border of the dark wood, the scout stammered, his eyes darting nervously toward me and then away. There are other tracks too. Many of them. Black Tooth. The name hung in the air like a death sentence. The rogues hadn't been a random encounter. They were still there, still watching. Draven's jaw tightened, his silver eyes turning to chips of ice. The protective warmth he had shown me moments before was replaced by the cold fury of a predator whose territory had been violated. They're testing our borders, Draven snarled. Seeing what we'll do. He turned to me, his expression softening slightly but still edged with a grim resolve. They were drawn by your scent, Elara. By the magic you used. They know you're here. Then I'll fight with you, I declared, sitting up, the furs pooling around my waist. No, he said, the word absolute. You will stay here. Within the stronghold. You are not a warrior and you are the prize they are hunting. I will not risk you. His words were a protective shield, but they also felt like the bars of a cage. Draven, I can help. My healing is exactly what makes you a target, he cut me off, his tone leaving no room for argument. You will remain here under guard. Mara will stay with you. That is my final word. The tension between us was a new and unwelcome presence. My desire for agency, to be more than just a prize to be protected, clashed with his fierce alpha instinct to keep me safe at all costs. He dressed quickly in his battle leathers, the soft intimacy of the night stripped away, replaced by the harsh reality of his world. Before he left, he came to me, his hands cupping my face. I will end this, he promised, his voice a low, dangerous vow. They will learn what it means to hunt on Shadowmoon land. He gave me one last hard kiss, a kiss that tasted of steel and impending violence. He left with 20 of his best warriors, a river of dark, silent shadows melting into the pre-dawn gloom. I watched them go from the high window of his chambers, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. He had left Kelia in command of the stronghold. And as the last of his warriors disappeared from sight, I felt the beta's cold, triumphant gaze on me from the courtyard below. I was alone, a treasure locked in the heart of the mountain, under the watchful eye of a wolf who wished me dead. Chapter 14. The beta's treachery. With Draven gone, the atmosphere in the stronghold shifted. The air grew heavy with a tense, watchful energy. Kelia moved through the caverns with a newfound swagger, her authority absolute. Her orders were sharp, her gaze, whenever it fell on me, was filled with a chilling malice. I was confined to Draven's chambers and the healer's den, always with 2 of Kelia's most loyal guards shadowing my every move. They were my protectors, but they felt like my jailers. Kelia didn't confront me with physical aggression. Her methods were far more insidious. She began a campaign of psychological warfare, designed to isolate me and erode my confidence. She would visit me under the pretense of checking on my safety, her words coded in a cloying, false sympathy. It must be so difficult for you, she said one afternoon, watching me grind herbs in Mara's den. Being the alpha's distraction. He has a history of it, you know. I kept my eyes on my work. I don't know what you mean. Oh, of course you don't, she sighed, a theatrical sound. He finds broken things, little fallen birds like you. He nurses them, makes them feel important. It's a flaw in his nature, this attraction to weakness. But once they are mended or once a greater threat appears, he loses interest. The Shadowmoon pack needs a strong Luna, not a passing fancy. Her words were poison, designed to prey on the deepest insecurities that Liam's rejection had carved into my soul. I tried to ignore them, to hold on to the memory of Draven's touch, the raw honesty in his eyes. But the seeds of doubt were planted. Her masterstroke came 2 days after Draven left. An alarm sounded, a piercing howl that signaled a breach. Kelia's guards rushed me back to Draven's chambers, locking the door behind me. From the high window I could see chaos in the courtyard below. A small pack of feral wolves, not rogues but desperate, half-starved wild things, had somehow gotten past the outer sentries and were causing panic among the omegas and pups. It was a minor threat, easily handled, but Kelia's response was theatrical. She shouted orders, directing warriors to protect the food stores and the armory, while largely ignoring the terrified non-combatants. It was a test. She was showing the pack how a real leader prioritized, but she was also creating a scenario where I was forced to remain uselessly locked away while others were in danger. From my vantage point, I saw a young pup no more than 4 years old, trip and fall directly in the path of a snarling, panicked wolf. No one was close enough to help. Without thinking, I acted. I shattered the window with a heavy stone paperweight and, ignoring the sharp sting of glass on my hands, climbed out onto the narrow ledge. It was a perilous drop, but I navigated a series of smaller ledges down to the courtyard, landing with a jarring impact. I reached the pup just as the feral wolf lunged, throwing myself in front of him. I didn't have a weapon, but I had my magic. I thrust my hands forward, and a wave of pure kinetic energy, an instinctive blast of the power Draven had helped me unlock, slammed into the creature, sending it flying. The courtyard fell silent. I had saved the child, but I had also disobeyed a direct order from the acting alpha and revealed a power that many would find frightening. Kelia appeared at my side, her face a mask of false concern. "Elara, what have you done?" she cried, her voice carrying across the silent yard. "You left your protected chambers. You put everyone at risk with your reckless magic." She had engineered the entire situation to frame me as an unstable, disobedient liability. Chapter 15. The Return and the Reckoning. Draven returned at dusk. He did not come back empty-handed. His warriors marched back into the stronghold, their faces grim but victorious, and in their midst they dragged a captive. It was a black-toothed rogue, bound in silver chains that sizzled against its skin, its eyes wild with hatred. The moment Draven entered the main cavern, the atmosphere changed. His raw, alpha power washed over the pack, silencing the whispers and quelling the unease Kelia had so carefully cultivated. His silver eyes scanned the crowd, searching, and when they found me, a wave of palpable relief washed over his features. But it was immediately followed by a gathering storm as he took in my disheveled appearance, the cuts on my hands from the broken window, and the defiant set of Kelia's jaw. He strode directly to me, ignoring everyone else. His hands came up to cup my face, his thumbs gently brushing my cheeks. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Before I could answer, Kelia stepped forward. "Alpha, there was an incident. A minor breach. Elara disobeyed a direct order and endangered herself and others with her uncontrolled magic." Draven's gaze remained locked on mine. "Is this true?" "A child was in danger," I said simply. "I acted." He looked from me to the shattered window of his chambers above, then back to Kelia. The cold fury that settled on his face was terrifying to behold. He knew. Without needing any more words, he knew he had been betrayed. "We will deal with your insubordination later, Kelia," he snarled, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I promise you." He turned his attention to the captive rogue, dragging it to the center of the cavern. "You have been hunting on my land," Draven said, his voice deceptively calm. "You have been testing my borders. Tell me why." The rogue spat on the stone floor. "We hunt where we please." Draven's hand shot out, grabbing the rogue by the throat. "You are a long way from your usual territory. Who sent you?" The rogue choked, its eyes bulging. "No one." "Wrong answer," Draven said, his grip tightening. "Who wants the healer?" Under the crushing force of Draven's will, the rogue's bravado finally broke. It gasped, its voice a ragged croak. Not for us. A contract, a promise of new territory." "From whom?" Draven's voice was like the grinding of tectonic plates. The rogue's eyes, filled with terror and malice, flickered toward me. "He wants her back. Or he wants her dead." "The Golden Beta, from the Crimson Fong pack." A collective gasp went through the hall. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a rogue problem. This was an act of war. My past had not only followed me, it had come to hunt me down, bringing its fangs to the very heart of the sanctuary that had become my home. Chapter 16. A Reckoning of Shadow and Stone. The rogue's confession echoed in the sudden tomb-like silence of the great hall. The name was a ghost from a past I thought I had buried, now returned to haunt me with an army at its back. The air crackled with the pack's collective shock and rising fury. My past was no longer my own. It was now a threat to the family that had taken me in. Draven's focus was absolute. He released the rogue's throat, and the creature slumped in its silver chains, gasping. Then Draven turned his glacial silver gaze upon Kelia. She visibly flinched, the color draining from her face. "You left your alpha's chambers unprotected," he stated, his voice dangerously soft. You created a diversion to isolate and frame the one thing our enemy is hunting. You put this entire pack at risk for the sake of your pathetic jealousy. Of it. I was testing her, Helia stammered, her arrogance crumbling into desperation. To see if she was strong enough. You are my beta, Draven's voice was like the cracking of stone. Your duty is to enforce my will, not to test it. Your loyalty is to this pack, not your own ambition. He stepped toward her, and every wolf in the hall, including me, felt the crushing weight of his alpha command. By the law of the Shadowmoon, the law of survival, treachery from within is a rot that must be cut out. You're no longer beta. You are no longer Shadowmoon. He didn't need to shout. The quiet finality of his words was more devastating than any roar. You are exiled. Be gone by sunrise. If you are found on my lands after that, my warriors will hunt you down like the rogue you are. Helia stared, her face a mask of disbelief and horror, before she crumpled to her knees. But there was no pity in the eyes of the pack. She had betrayed their code. She was broken, and they had no use for broken things that could not be mended. With the internal threat dealt with, Draven turned his attention back to the larger one. He called his war council, the most seasoned warriors and strategists, to the strategy room. When I made to follow, one of the guards moved to block my path. The Luna stays where it is safe, he said, his voice respectful but firm. The Luna, I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching, knows the tactics and the mindset of the Crimson Fong. I know, Liam. My insight is a weapon you need. I will be at that council. Draven, who had overheard, turned. I saw the conflict in his eyes. The fierce, primal urge to lock me away from all danger warring with the respect he was beginning to have for my strength. I held his gaze, willing him to see me not as a weakness to be protected, but as a partner in this fight. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Let her pass. Later that night, after hours of planning defenses and poring over maps, we were alone again in his chambers. The threat of the coming battle hung heavy in the air, a charge that heightened every sense. He came to me by the fire, his hands finding my waist and pulling me against him. I should send you away, he murmured against my hair, his voice rough with a fear he would never show his pack. Far to the north, where he could never find you. You won't, I whispered, my arms wrapping around his neck. Because you know I wouldn't go. My place is here with you. This is my home now, Draven. And I will fight for it. His silver eyes burned into mine, filled with a raw, possessive fire. Then let him come, he growled. Let him see what it means to threaten what is mine. He lowered his head, and his teeth grazed the sensitive skin of my neck, just beside where a true mating mark would one day be. It wasn't a bite, not yet, but it was a promise. A brand of intent. He was marking me as his in the only way he could before the coming storm, a vow sealed not with ceremony, but with the desperate, consuming passion of two souls bracing for war. Chapter 17. The Quiet Before the Storm. The next few days were a blur of tense preparation. The Shadowmoon stronghold, usually a place of quiet, guarded life, transformed into a humming fortress. Warriors sharpened blades, fletched arrows with black feathers, and set traps along the narrow mountain passes. The scent of hot metal and nervous sweat mingled with the ever-present aroma of pine. I refused to be idle. My fight was not on the front lines with a sword, but in the heart of the stronghold. With Mara's help, I turned the great hall into an infirmary. We stripped the tables, laying out furs and clean linens. I spent every waking hour using my grandmother's knowledge, preparing supplies far beyond simple bandages. I brewed powerful pain-dulling teas, created fast-acting clotting powders from ground yarrow and stone moss, and prepared salves to draw out the foul poisons the Blacktooth were known to use on their blades. The pack watched me work. At first they were hesitant, but as they saw the methodical, tireless way I prepared for the coming bloodshed, their respect grew. Warriors would stop by, offering to help grind herbs or carry water. They no longer saw a fragile Omega. They saw their healer, a vital part of their survival. My healing, once a mark of shame, was becoming my armor. One night, as I was finishing a batch of fever-reducing poultices, Draven entered the now empty hall. He moved with a weary quietness, the weight of his command heavy on his shoulders. He didn't speak, just came and stood beside me watching my hands work. My mother was a healer, he said, his voice startlingly soft in the cavernous space. I looked up at him, surprised. He rarely spoke of his past. His fingers brushed over a long, jagged scar that ran across his ribs. I was young. We were part of a northern pack before it fell. Rogues attacked. She died trying to shield me, a healing salve still clutched in her hand. I never understood then. I thought her magic was no match for claws and teeth. I thought strength was only about how much you could bleed, not how much you could mend. He finally met my eyes, and in their silver depths, I saw the ghost of a lonely, scarred boy. I was wrong. The confession was a rare and precious gift, a piece of his fractured soul offered to me in the quiet of the night. I reached out, my fingers tracing the scar on his side. She was strong, Draven. And so are you. He captured my hand, his grip tight, almost desperate. Liam has no idea what he is coming for, he murmured. He thinks he is hunting a broken Omega. But he is marching into the heart of a mountain that will bleed for its Luna. He pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my hair. It wasn't the fiery passion of our first nights together, but something deeper, more profound. It was the desperate intimacy of two souls clinging to one another on the precipice of war, a quiet promise whispered in the dark that whatever came with the dawn, they would face it together. Chapter 18: The Red Siege. The attack came not at dawn but in the dead of night, under a moon shrouded by thick ominous clouds. The war horn's mournful cry blasted through the stronghold, a sound that ripped me from a fitful sleep in Draven's bed. The siege had begun. Chaos erupted. Warriors poured into the courtyards, their armor glinting in the torchlight. The first wave of rogues crashed against the stronghold's main gate, a tide of snarling, feral bodies. Their howls were a symphony of mindless rage, a sound designed to instill terror. Draven was already dressed, a whirlwind of dark leather and gleaming steel. He gave me one last hard look. Stay inside. Bar the doors. Do what you do best, Elara. Keep them alive. And then he was gone, a king leading his people into battle. The infirmary in the great hall quickly became a scene from a nightmare. The first casualties were brought in, their bodies mangled, their blood staining the furs. The metallic scent of it filled the air, thick and cloying. Mara and I worked in a frantic synchronized rhythm. We staunched bleeding, cleaned wounds, and forced healing drafts down the throats of groaning warriors. I pushed my magic, feeling the familiar warmth flow from my hands, but I had to ration it, using it only for the most grievous injuries lest I exhaust myself too soon. 4 hours, the sounds of battle raged outside. The clash of steel, the screams of the dying, the triumphant roars of the Shadowmoon, and the guttural snarls of the Black Tooth. The stronghold's defenses were formidable, but the rogues were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. They fought with a suicidal fervor, fueled by Liam's promises of riches and territory. Then a new sound, a splintering crash from the western flank. A secondary entrance, one thought to be impenetrable, had been breached. The controlled chaos of the infirmary turned to real fear as the sounds of fighting grew closer. A warrior stumbled in, clutching a sword in one hand and his bleeding side with the other. "They're inside the lower caves," he gasped before collapsing. Panic began to set in. We were losing. The doors to the great hall burst open. It wasn't a wounded Shadowmoon wolf. It was a rogue, massive and scarred, its eyes burning with bloodlust. It saw the room full of the wounded and helpless, and a cruel, fang-filled grin split its face. Mara screamed, trying to shield a young warrior with her own frail body. I didn't have time to think. Primal instinct took over. I shoved Mara aside and faced the beast. It lunged. I threw my hands forward, not in a gesture of healing but of pure force. I remembered the feeling from the courtyard, the kinetic energy, but this time I focused it. I didn't just push. I willed it to become a spear of solid air. A visible shockwave erupted from my palms, slamming into the rogue's chest with the force of a battering ram. The creature was thrown backward, crashing into the stone wall with a sickening crunch before slumping to the floor, stunned and broken. The hall was silent. Everyone, Mara included, stared at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. I stood, chest heaving, my hands tingling with the raw, untamed power I had just unleashed. And in that moment the rogue leader, a hulking monster with one eye, stepped through the shattered doorway, a bloody axe in his hand. He surveyed the scene, his single eye landing on me with a flicker of recognition. "So," he snarled, "the little healer has claws." He took a menacing step forward, but before he could take another, a blur of black fury slammed into him from the side. It was Draven, wounded, bleeding from a gash on his temple, but his eyes were blazing with the fire of 1,000 storms. He had come for me. Chapter 19. An Alpha's Fury, a Luna's Power. The fight between Draven and the one-eyed rogue leader was a maelstrom of violence. It was not a duel of skill but a brutal clash of two apex predators. The rogue was a mountain of muscle and rage, his axe swinging in wide, devastating arcs that chipped stone from the walls. Draven was faster, a shadow of lethal precision, his twin blades a blur of silver, darting in to inflict deep cuts before flowing away from the axe's clumsy power. The great hall became their arena. The wounded who could move crawled to the edges, watching with a mixture of terror and awe. I stood frozen, my heart in my throat, clutching the small dagger I kept for cutting herbs. Draven was magnificent, but he was also wounded and exhausted from hours of fighting. He began to slow, his movements losing their razor-sharp edge. The rogue leader saw it, pressing his advantage. He feinted high with his axe, then brought his armored boot around in a vicious kick that caught Draven in his injured side. Draven cried out, stumbling back. "The golden beta pays well," the rogue roared, laughing as he advanced on the faltering alpha. "He said you would bleed for the little omega. He will be pleased to know you will die for her." He raised his axe for the final, killing blow. Time seemed to stretch, to slow. There was no way Draven could recover in time. My mind screamed. I saw it all playing out. Draven falling, the pack losing its heart, the stronghold being overrun, and me being dragged back to Liam in chains. The word was a silent roar in my soul. I would not let it happen. I closed my eyes, reaching for my magic but not for the gentle warmth of healing. I reached past it, deeper, to the raw, untamed wellspring of power I had touched twice before. This time I didn't just dip into it, I plunged. I opened myself to the life force of the mountain itself, the ancient, unyielding energy that flowed through the very stone beneath my feet. Power vast and overwhelming surged through me. It was too much, a roaring river that threatened to tear me apart, but I held on, shaping it with my will. I opened my eyes and thrust my hands toward the rogue leader. It wasn't a blast of force this time. It was a wave of pure silver light that erupted from my body. It wasn't violent, but it was absolute. As the light washed over the rogue, he screamed, not in pain but in terror. The wild, bloodthirsty rage in his eyes was instantly extinguished, replaced by a crushing, spiritual weight. He dropped his axe, clutching his head as if his very spirit were being brought to its knees. Every rogue in the hall and the adjoining caves felt it, a wave of pure alpha-level dominance that was not of a wolf but of the land itself. Their fighting spirit shattered. Draven, seeing his chance, surged forward. With a final, desperate roar, he drove his blade deep into the rogue leader's heart. The one-eyed monster collapsed, his death rattle lost in the sudden, echoing silence. The remaining rogues, their leader dead and their courage broken by my magic, turned and fled, a panicked, disorganized rout. The siege was over. In the stunned quiet that followed, the pack stared at me, their alpha Luna, who stood glowing faintly in the torchlight. Draven came to me, his body battered but his eyes shining with an emotion that transcended pride. He reached out, his blood-stained hand cupping my cheek. "Elara," he breathed. Just then a sentry rushed in from the now-secured main gate. "Alpha." A single rider approaches. Under a flag of truce from the Crimson Fong. Chapter 20. The Last Ember. The parley took place on a windswept ridge that marked the neutral ground between our territories. The air was cold and clean, carrying the scent of pine and the faintest hint of distant snow. Draven stood at my side, a formidable, silent presence. He was still bandaged, but his power was undiminished. He had brought only 10 of his best warriors, a show of confidence, not weakness. Liam arrived with his own honor guard, looking every bit the golden beta. His armor was polished to a mirror shine, his blonde hair perfect. But I saw what others might miss. The faint, tight lines of strain around his eyes, the way his hand rested a little too readily on the pommel of his sword. He was a man trying to project a power he no longer felt. His gambit had failed spectacularly, and now he was here to salvage what was left of his pride. His stormy blue eyes found me immediately. I saw the flicker of shock, the disbelief. He had expected to see a broken, terrified Omega. He did not recognize the woman who stood before him, clad in dark Shadowmoon leather, with the most powerful alpha in the territories at her side. Elara, he began, his voice smooth, practiced. I came to retrieve what is mine. You were confused, lost. You can return to the Crimson Fong. Your indiscretion with this brute will be forgiven. I almost laughed. The arrogance, the sheer blindness of it was astounding. Before Draven could unleash the fury I felt building beside me, I stepped forward. There is nothing of yours here, Liam, I said, my voice calm and clear, carried on the wind. The girl you rejected died in the Darkwood. You did not break me. You freed me. He flinched, his composure cracking. Freed you? To live with these savages? You are a healer meant for a civilized pack, for a life of honor by my side. Honor? I asked, and this time a small, cold smile touched my lips. Was there honor in hiring murderers to hunt down a woman you cast aside? Was there honor in trying to burn this world to the ground because your pride was wounded? You speak of honor, but you reek of fear. You are afraid that the pack you value so highly will see you for what you truly are. A boy playing at being a king who threw away a diamond because he was too foolish to see its worth. Every word was a perfectly aimed blow. I saw it land, saw his face pale, his knuckles whiten on his sword. He had no response. I turned my back on him then, a final, dismissive act. Let's go home, Draven. Draven stepped forward, his silver eyes locking onto Liam's. This is the only warning you will ever receive, he said, his voice a low, rumbling promise of death. If I ever see you, your warriors, or even your shadow near my lands or my Luna again, I will not send a reply. I will come myself, and I will erase the Crimson Fong from the memory of all wolves. We walked away, leaving Liam standing on that ridge, utterly defeated, not by a blade, but by the quiet, unshakable strength of the woman he had deemed worthless. That night, back in the quiet of our chambers, I tended to the last of Draven's wounds. The stronghold was battered but celebrating. We were a family, forged anew in the crucible of battle. He won't be a problem again, Draven said, his hand covering mine as I finished wrapping his ribs. I know, I replied. He was just the last ghost that needed to be put to rest. Draven turned, pulling me onto his lap. The firelight danced in his silver eyes, now filled with a warmth that was mine alone. Mara told me, he began, his voice soft, that in the old tongue, the name for a healer whose magic can both mend and break is Lyra. The heart of the pack. He brought his forehead to rest against mine. Elara, Lyra of the Shadowmoon. Will you be my Luna? Not as my possession but as my partner. My heart. Tears filled my eyes, not of sorrow but of a joy so profound it ached. Yes, I whispered. He smiled, a true, unguarded smile that transformed his harsh features. Outside, a lone wolf howled, a long, joyous cry that was answered by another and then another, until the entire mountain sang with the song of our pack. He was no longer just the alpha of shadows, and I was no longer the ember of shame. Together, we were the fire that would keep the Shadowmoon warm for all the winters to come.